Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Corey Hill at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I oversee our state's early intervention comprehensive system of personnel development. As you can see, right in the midst of conference, I've lost the video, the camera on my laptop, but I figure we're all pretty flexible early interventionists. So you will look at my still photo instead of getting to see me in person. But we're so glad you joined us for our session today, Assessment, What's the Big Deal About Stacking Little Cubes? I'd like to have my co-presenters introduce themselves. Lisa, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Terry. I'm an early intervention professional development consultant here in Virginia, and welcome.
And Dana.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Same job as Lisa. I'm one of our professional development consultants. I work in Virginia, and I'll tell you, my Zoom camera has flipped my image, and I'm so distracted by that. So I don't, that's like the Zoom world we live in, like Zoom fatigue. Somebody said Zoom zombies the other day. So we hope you're not a Zoom zombie yet, and you're ready to talk about assessment today.
Thanks, Dana. I love that, Zoom zombies. That's kind of how I'm feeling as I was trying to troubleshoot this camera all morning. So again, welcome. And what I'd like you all to think about before we really dig in, we're wondering, when's the last time you played with blocks or cubes? As an adult, in your daily routine, when's the last time you played with blocks? And I'm not talking about as an early interventionist in assessments, just in your day-to-day. If you want to, you can type that in chat if you are somebody who does that routinely. Not many years. Jordan says never. Exactly. Yeah, thanks, Patty. Yeah, okay, we can go to the next slide. So as we start thinking about this today, unless you recently have played a game like Jenga, stacking blocks is not a typical part of our adult routines. Except, of course, if you're an early interventionist and you do this during your evaluations or assessments. So today we're really going to highlight some key ideas about early intervention assessment, including your knowledge of child development and how important that is, the functionality, what's the function of all of those skills, those discrete skills on testing protocols, and what are the underlying skills that you're actually looking for when you do those items during an assessment or an evaluation. Next, we're going to think about how we explain to families why we're even looking for those kind of things and how they can practice in real life, everyday routines and activities without giving them something to do that they wouldn't do otherwise. And then we're hoping that we can give you some resources that will help you to practice and hone your functional assessment skills. When we started really thinking about assessment and early intervention, one of the things we recognized was that the DEC recommended practices have many RPs that are tied to assessment that are very applicable to our work in early intervention. But for this session, we tried to focus on two of the assessment practices. The first one is A7. Practitioners obtain information about the child's skills in daily activities, routines, and environments, such as home, center, and community. And then the second one is A8. Practitioners use clinical reasoning in addition to assessment results to identify the child's current levels of functioning and to determine the child's eligibility and plan for instruction. So that's what we're going to focus on. And Lisa's going to get us started.
Thanks, Corey. Oh, sorry. I'm just maneuvering this slide. It's funny and it's wonky. I keep getting this toolbar. So if you see me correcting that, it's just because I'm trying to get rid of this toolbar that you guys can't see that's at the bottom, so you can see the closed captioning. All right, so let's just get started with this statement. In 1979, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, I always mess people's names up, but he described developmental psychology as the science of the strange behavior of children with strange adults in strange situations for the briefest period of time. So we can really think about this statement and easily apply this to our understanding of child development, to what many of our practices about assessment have really looked like over time, right? We know that during those assessments, we're really entering a child's home. It's unfamiliar people that are joining the child and their family. They're really disrupting their regular routines. They're asking a lot of questions. They're taking all of their parents' attention and time during those conversations. And they're simultaneously really introducing these new tasks like trying to get a Cheerio out of a bottle. Who's heard of that, right? So who does that? And so what we want you to really think about and consider today is how can we do better? So let's think about that in the context of child development. So we all learn about child development, right? You guys are at the DEC conference. So what I want you to really think about and drop in chat is, how did you learn about child development? Tell us in chat, how did you learn about child development? And Dana and Corey will monitor the Whova chat, but if you guys can, just try to type in the Zoom chat. That would be helpful because that's the only one that I can see. But if I miss anything in the Whova chat, they'll let me know. Yeah, graduate school, from being a mom. So just simply by your experience, right? Yep, school, college experiences, experiences with babysitting. I think we all might have started out babysitting, right? Taking care of other kiddos. Maybe you have nieces, maybe you have nephews. Yeah, parenting books, reading a lot of books about child development and what that looks like. Yeah, in college, reiterated in professional practice, right? So then becoming a mom. So you have a lot of different ways that you're learning about child development. Oh, yep, my family had school for special needs kids in Venezuela. How neat. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, first in undergrad. So a lot of people are learning in college first, then you have your on the job and then your interactions with family. So it's really this ongoing process too, right? So you're gaining it through some of that experiences. Yeah, Amber says, yes, still learning. I think we always feel like that too, right? And you have, sometimes you might have a mentor. One of the things that I always do, especially before assessments, I look at what the child's level is, and then I make sure that I am reading what the child should be doing at that age. And I feel like that's just a good refresher, and it really keeps it fresh in your mind, especially when we're working with children that do typically have a lot of developmental delays. And so it's always good to stay fresh on that typical development and those expectations. So let's consider this next quote. Professionals who work with young children and their families must have a foundational knowledge of child development from birth to 3 years. Rather than focusing on discrete skills, understanding how functional skills relate to a child's and family's routines and activities is essential. This helps us recognize how the family functions while building on their strengths and considering their priorities. Now, this statement is actually found in our child development module that's actually free. Anyone can access it. You can visit our website to go see more there. I think Dana will probably drop the link in the Whova chat because that's the only one that's clickable for you guys. But feel free to check that out. But think about this, this quote too. This is really what early intervention is about, right? We're really focused on the child's strengths and their priorities. Now let's look at another quote. So when we can link our knowledge of child development to our assessment practices, what we're doing is really using that whole child approach to early intervention, right? So this whole child approach, it's really at the core of the 3 child global outcomes. So this is what's helping us to monitor, and many of us are really using this as our framework for early childhood development. So this quote is from, if you go to the ECTA website, they have a child outcome summary tab, and Dana, I think she's going to drop that link in there too. But this is found right there on that. And it says the 3 child outcomes measured by early intervention and early childhood special education systems encompass functional skills and behaviors that are meaningful for a child's participation in everyday routines. They cut across developmental domains to represent the integrated nature of how children develop, learn, and thrive. The breadth of these outcomes provides a framework for describing and consistently measuring children's functional skills and behaviors across settings and situations. So take a look at the screen, and what I want you guys to do, type in chat, what are the important words that really stand out to you in this quote? What pops out to you the most? Type that into chat. Yeah, functional, right? Functional, that's the important piece. Yes, meaningful, something that's really valuable to the family too. Yeah, integrated. So you're integrating all of these skills into what they're already doing, right? Their routines and their activities. Yes, routines, you nailed it, right? And that's another key thing in early intervention, right? We're really focused on supporting the family within the routines. That framework, it's really giving us the framework, and it's really setting us up for success. Yeah, multiple settings, and that's key too, right? A lot of different settings and situations. It's not just sitting on the floor, a lot of different contexts, a lot of different environments, and a lot of different of those everyday activities. You guys nailed it. And those are the exact words that we're going to keep in mind for our next activity. And I'm going to pass it back over to Dana.
Thanks, Lisa. So like Lisa said, we often learn about child development, we learn about assessment practices. We often have to, I think we have to seek out, especially when you're in the job, when you're working as an early interventionist, you have to seek out professional development to kind of hone your skills and adapt them to the environments where you find yourselves. Because early intervention assessment doesn't really look the same as assessment in other locations, right? So we checked in with you guys in the poll. We wanted to draw your attention to a 3-part learning deck series that we hosted this summer. This was a series called What Do Assessment Practices Really Look Like in Early Intervention? And the learning deck was based on our monograph, an article that we wrote in the assessment monograph recently. So I noticed in the poll, most people have not watched the learning deck, which is completely fine. But we wanted to see if you guys, if you guys had, we would adapt what we were doing today. If a lot of folks had, no problem that you haven't, but know that it's a resource. And because it's a 3-part series, we get to go deeper into assessment practices than we'll have time to do today. Today, we're going to kind of focus on some different assessment tasks than we focused on during the learning deck. So if you did attend the learning deck, no worries. We're gonna work together today to work through some others. So Lisa, we're ready for the next slide. We really today, kind of you saw it in our title, we're grounding ourselves in the stacking blocks. So this should look really familiar to anybody in early childhood. I think pretty much every assessment tool ever created for infants and toddlers has something to do with stacking 1-inch cubes or stacking blocks. We've already established with Corey's question at the beginning that in the real world, outside of early interventionists or preschool teachers, we don't spend a lot of time stacking 1-inch cubes, right? So it's so I think we have to think about this is a great tool or a task to think about what's the function, what's the why behind why this is even on our assessment tasks. So let's start with thinking about around what age do we typically assess for stacking blocks? Around what age do we think toddlers can build a tower like the one you see on screen, which is, I guess, what, 5 or 6 cubes. So put your best guess in the chat and let me know, what do you know about when do we expect toddlers to be able to build a tower like this? At what age do we look for this on an assessment? Sarah gets us started off with 18 months. Yep. Andrea says 2. So you guys are right in the right ballpark, right? It's usually around 17 months on the ELAP that we see 3 to 4 tower, 3 to 4 blocks, and then around 2 that we want them to stack that taller tower. Yep, Chris says she's got that range there too. Yep. So I think you guys are there. So you know this, right? You know this is sort of one of those almost like a milestone activities on our assessment tools. But I always think when I pull out when I used to pull out the 1-inch blocks, kids would look at it, and it's probably something their parents have never allowed them to do. Like, these are choking hazards, right? They fit in the little toilet paper tube. I did have a child one time pop the 1-inch cube in his mouth, and it got stuck during an assessment. So that was like super awful. He was able to get it out, but that was a moment I'm thinking, why am I doing this? But let's talk about the why. So let's talk about, what does stacking blocks really tell us? So I want you guys to think, when a child can stack 1-inch cubes, whether they're 18 months, 24 months, or maybe we're, assessing this and the child is older and they are at that developmental level. What does it tell us about their development? When you think about stacking blocks, it doesn't matter in the real world that he can stack them, the child can stack them, but what are we looking for? What are those underlying skills that we see when a child can stack blocks? Put it into chat for me. What is showing us that when a child can stack blocks, what does it show us about his development? Planning, yep, Stephanie. So maybe some of that motor planning. Yep, Stacy says fine motor planning. Patty says eye-hand coordination. And Sarah says organized thinking, motor skills. Let me check the Hoover stat. Debbie says eye-hand coordination, yep. Following directions, yep. Hyacinth says following directions, because sometimes, Hyacinth, we get the children to imitate us, right? Grasp, Jordan says fine motor organization, kind of that control, release, and grasp. Let's see, thinking about what domain we're looking for. Chris says, so fine motor cognitive, that's usually where that shows up on our tests. Yep, Chris. So auditory skills. So Sarah, tell me in chat more about, what do you mean by auditory skills? I'm wondering if that's like with that following directions, like maybe we're giving them the direction for what to do and we're having them follow it without an imitation. So that could be some of that auditory processing. Yeah, they heard you and they followed the direction. Thanks, Sarah. So really, when we're looking at tasks like this, yep, Andrea says perceptual motor, vision, you guys are hitting all of them, problem solving. When we watch a child stack blocks, we have to really remember that we're not watching to see if they can do that particular task. I mean, we are, because we have to check it off on our tool, but we're watching to see if they have all of the underlying skills necessary to complete that task. So it's like those underlying skills that are really important. Can he problem solve? Can that child, balance it, play in that vertical plane? Does he have the attention and the persistence and the frustration tolerance to manage it when the tower falls? Sometimes we'll look for joint attention if a child stacks and he looks up to see if someone is watching. It's all of those developmental skills that are really, I get my words mixed up, all of those developmental skills behind that task that are really important. So it's not really whether he can stack, because like we said, most normal people don't stack blocks. Like people in early intervention, we do, but most children across the world grow up and never stack a block. So we have to put it in perspective there too. They don't need to learn to stack blocks to be, happy, functioning adults, but it's a task on our test that tells us a lot about what kids can do and where they struggle. It also helps us know about how we can begin to think about looking at development across all areas of development and see where we see patterns. If we see motor planning challenges with blocks, we're going to see it with other things in the test too. So now tell me in chat, where might you see stacking or some of these underlying skills coming up in daily activities? Think about those underlying skills of problem solving, perceptual motor, vision, auditory processing, stuff you typed into chat. Where might you see those same underlying skills pop up in everyday life if we put the blocks aside? Yeah, thanks, Corey. She's got that key point in there. Most kids don't grow up stacking blocks. In fact, my son, who's 17, I'm pretty sure never stacked a block. He threw them, but he never stacked one when he was little. And you better believe I had the help in the ELAP nearby to check his development. So Melissa says meal times. Yeah, we might see kids stacking crackers, or we might see them using their eye-hand coordination to feed themselves. Absolutely. Yep, Stephanie, I hadn't even scrolled down, but she said self-feeding. Sarah said carrying several items. Yep, we might see that with some of their coordination and their planning. Trying to scroll down. Let's see, balancing. Yep, balancing can show up when kids are helping put things away in the pantry, or they're balancing their toys while they're playing with other activities. Let me check the chat. Dressing skills, we might see some of these. So That's an important link for us to make for families, because I can't tell you how many families, yeah, Patty says putting toys away in an organized way, will want to go out and buy the blocks because their child didn't stack them on the test. So we want to help we need to make that connection for ourselves. We understand assessment, and then we need to help families make that connection for what are we really looking for and how do we support development. We don't teach. We should never have a goal in IFSP for stacking blocks, but we want to address those underlying skills so that the child can use those skills in other activities. Yeah, Sarah says following directions everywhere. We can use that one everywhere for sure. So our next slide gives you an example of where that might show up in everyday life. Here we have our little guy here who's, we do have stacking. So stacking can show up in real life, but he's hanging out in the kitchen where his mom wanted him to play while she was making dinner. So they're practicing doing some stacking with things that were in the cabinet. I worked with the family once, and that's what the mother did. She opened up a cabinet. She had a low cabinet for children when she was making dinner, and they could pull out the pots and the pans and Tupperware bowls and little stacking jars, and they kind of just played with them and had fun. So sometimes we do weave stacking in, but what's really important, does he have that eye-hand coordination? Does he have that beautiful joint attention you see there? That's where we want to focus. So I'm going to hand it over to Corey so she can take us into some more practice with this.
All right, thanks, Dana. So you guys, we're going to try to be really brave, and we're going to take you into breakout rooms. So everybody stick out their tongue just the right way, stand on one foot, send up good vibes that this is all going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide you into 5 breakout groups where you'll have the opportunity to really think about some of those common discrete skill testing items. So this is on your handout, but depending on how you want to learn, so you remember what group you're in, feel free to take a quick screenshot of this picture or write yourself a quick note so you know if you arrive in group number 1, you're going to be talking about making animal sounds. Group 2 is going to be using a stick to reach an object. Group 3, stringing beads. Group 4, pushing heavy objects. And group 5 is the infamous Cheerio in a bottle. So be sure you take a quick note, and then if we can go to the next slide, please, Lisa. When you get out in your breakout room, the first thing you want to do is determine who's going to be your reporter, because we're going to come back together and each group is going to report out. So you have the opportunity to hear from every group about 5 different discrete testing items. You just heard 1, the stacking the cubes, and you'll hear 5 more. When you're in your group, determine who's going to report out. And then what we want you to discuss is what domain do you usually see the item? It could be in several different domains. What the key underlying functional skills might be. This one's going to be really important. How do you explain the importance of this skill to a caregiver? And how can you help them think about opportunities to practice in their daily activities? Like Dana said, so they don't feel like they have to go out and have these testing items. But what does this look like in their everyday and routines and activities? So again, take a quick note about what you're doing in your breakout rooms. This is also on your handout. And in just a minute, Lisa's going to send you to your breakout rooms. I am going to pause for just a second, Lisa, and make sure if anybody has any questions, we'll take just a second and feel free to type in chat what you're going to do when you get in your session, in your breakout.
Yes, and if they want to take a screenshot of the screen now too.
Yeah, that's another strategy you can use.
All right, are you ready for me to move them? I am ready on my end.
I think it's go time. Yes, thank you, Lisa. Okay, Lisa, are we good? Everybody looks like they're back on your end.
We are good.
All right. Thank you, guys. We appreciate you having those discussions. What we're going to do now is look at each group. And we'll go in order, numerical order, just to make it easy. So let's look at group 1, making animal sounds. Whoever is the reporter, please feel free to unmute yourself and let's hear what you guys talked about. So we know that making animal sounds is one of those test items all the time. So let's see who the reporter is for that, please. Are you able to unmute? Type in chat if you're having trouble. I'm not seeing anybody unmuting. How about Lisa or Dana? Are you seeing anything or anything in chat?
No, I don't see anything in the Whoova chat or the participant chat. It could be, Corey, that some people, if they don't have a mic access, like if they're at a desktop in their office, that could be an issue too. So I guess we could rely on the chat for group 1. Group 1, oh, I do see it said, we had issues. That's right, they had sound issues. Well, Jesse, if you're able or somebody in your group is able to type into the chat, that would be great. And I can monitor the Whoova chat if you want to type here or if you want to type in Zoom. And you can kind of just go top to bottom on the bullets. What domains did you guys talk about? What key functional underlying skills, etc. So Corey in the Whoova chat, she's telling me they had some issues.
Okay, thanks. And I can't see that right now, but you guys, I got put in that group. So I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. Jesse, if you're able to help us with chat, that would be great. But I also know Jennifer Kilgo and Faith, you guys were in there. Please feel free to type and help us so we can get started on group number 1.
Well, Corey, in the chat, Jesse is saying they didn't actually get to discuss it because they had such issues. So I think folks are going to type it into the chat. And others can help out too. I think if that group didn't discuss, maybe we have others throw it into chat what your thoughts too.
Okay, so I can see the Zoom chat and Stacy got us started. She says it's early language skills. So thanks, Carrie. The domain you often see that is language, expressive and receptive language. And the Maria Alicia, I hope I'm saying your name close to right, says that sounds, recognizing the photo, matching with the sounds. All right, visual and cognitive skills. Shapes, absolutely. Big and small. Yeah, there are so many underlying skills that book skills and making animal sounds. But again, when we think about the animal sounds, we have a colleague who is a speech language pathologist who talks about this. Certainly, we've all played games like singing songs about Old MacDonald had a farm, and but again, I don't know if you all knew, it was new for me to know that animal sounds sound different in different cultures, in different languages. And so what does this mean? Why is this important? When you think about how you would explain this skill to caregivers, type in chat, what might you tell them why that's even something we look for? I'll give you guys a second to type some things in chat. Carrie says it's a form of imitation, and imitation is how kids learn. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for getting us going, Carrie. Any other ideas? Hyacinth says animal sounds are all part of imitation. Again, it can be a reciprocal communication and sound between adult and child. It can be one of those really nice serve and return back and forth. You know, I make a mooing sound, the child tries to imitate that. Absolutely.
And
when
Corey,
you're
in the
having a
Whova chat, we
caregiver
have
that has,
in
when
the
you have a
Whova chat, we
caregiver
have
that
Jonas
speaks a
mentioned,
different language.
and we have Kim has mentioned it can be really just be fun, which can be motivating. So it can be more of a strategy than something we have to teach. So those are two things that showed up in Whova. I'm sorry if somebody else was talking at the same time.
Maria Alicia, were you? Yes, I see your hand raised. Feel free to unmute.
When you have caregivers that speak a different language than the child, in Spanish, the sounds of animals, not all are the same in English. Just the sound, you can go say moo, but we may have a different accent into it. When I was teaching my kids, what does the chick say? In Spanish, we just say pew, 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 pew. And my
Pio
kids
Pio.
thought that I was saying what the gun, pew, pew. So that I had to learn that when I was teaching them, I have to learn that how the sound was for them in English. So
Absolutely. One time I observed a visit with one of my students who was doing something, and I do not speak Spanish. And the student was making some animal sounds and using a Spanish word and making animal sounds. And the interpreter said to me, she's actually making or saying the word for chicken that's like a meal, like chicken on a plate, which is different than chicken in a farmyard. Again, I didn't know that, but we could tell that the mother was looking a little perplexed about what was happening during that session. So I appreciate that information. Carrie and I believe Dana said Kim both hit on it's fun. It's a way to increase engagement and draw children into the play. So let's go ahead. Thank you guys. Let's go ahead and look at group number 2. Who was our speaker for that one? And I'm going to turn this one over to Dana.
Yeah, so this one is probably my second least favorite item on tests other than blocks. It was the weird one, and around 17 months old on the ELAP, kids had to use a stick to retrieve something. So if you're able to unmute, I would love to hear from the leader of group 2.
We didn't appoint a leader, but I'll talk.
Oh, go for it.
Unless somebody wants to fight me for it, but.
And I want to see that over Zoom.
Yeah. We talked about talking about to parents that tool use is something that we do all the time. Your ball rolls under the couch, and how are you going to get it out if your arm's not long enough? Sticking a wand into bubbles so that you get the soapy film to blow is tool use. Using a pencil and a crayon, that's tool use. It's using a tool to make marks on the paper. And so it's something that happens all the time in everything we do. Using a fork and spoon is tool use. So it's just a quick way to measure, but we're looking for that skill across things that they do every day.
Fantastic. So you covered all of the items on the screen with that great explanation. Thank you for doing that. Yep, it's all about using tools, and functionally we can look for that in lots of different ways. I love your explanation would help the family know what you're looking for, but also give them examples of where they can look for it every day. So awesome. Thank you, group 2. Let's see, I'm going to pass it off to Lisa for group 3.
All right, let's see if I can maneuver things without getting that toolbar blocking closed caption thing again. All right, so group 3, stringing beads. Does anyone want to go ahead and unmute and speak up for this group?
Hey, I'm gonna speak.
Wendy, thank you.
Sure. We talked about how stringing beads covers, we really see that in the domains of fine motor and cognitive. And some of the key underlying functional skills include hand-eye coordination, visual motor integration, persistence, problem solving, imitation, following directions, attention span, that grasp, and also language development like counting and coloring, and understanding how their hands can do different functions at the same time. So
yeah, that's great. Did you guys talk about some of how you would explain this to a caregiver too, and give them a little bit of background?
We talked a little bit about how we could share with the caregiver the importance of a child paying attention and having that joint attention, and how that can influence the rest of their daily activities. And we also talked about how we could explain age-appropriate developmental skills, and explaining that visual motor integration with the families, and how that can affect, and all of their skills, and the importance of managing materials. We talked a little bit about how families nowadays are so focused on school skills, those preschool skills. Oh, I want my child to know the alphabet and colors and numbers. And so if we can help them understand, like, hey, this is important because this is managing different materials, and how that will assist in the school setting, that might help families kind of understand that too. So.
Yeah, well, I love too how you even talked about how you would just educate them on some of the milestones too, because I think that's a really important piece when we're talking to parents and really setting them up for success. And one of the things that I really like to do too is when we're thinking about some of that imitation, thinking about how children, a big part of even that underlying skill with imitation is that children are starting to learn what the adult's intentions are. So you imitate something and the children are starting to learn their meaning behind behavior and why the adult's doing that. And they're getting a little bit more attuned to other people. And that's like a little bit more of that social part of it too. Like if I'm happy, I get what when I get what I want, I'm happy. When I don't, I'm mad, And so I think that's another critical part of really explaining that to parents too. What were some of the opportunities that you guys thought about, Wendy, for practice in their daily activities?
We talked about, this is obviously typically an older skill, the stringing beads. It's that 2 to 3 year old range. But we talked about putting a button through a hole, like with dressing, zipping up a zipper, and also opening containers, since the two hands are doing 2 different functions during that time. So.
Yeah, those are great. Thanks so much, Wendy, for sharing some information. One of the other routines that I always think about that happens so frequently in a young child's life is the car seat buckles too, and how determined children are, because they always want to learn like how to push it in and figure that out. And so I think that's also another great learning opportunity for practice for them too. Well, I appreciate you sharing. We're going to move on to group 4 with Corey.
All right, who was willing to be the reporter for group 4 about pushing a heavy object?
I am not sure that we had a recorder per se, but we did talk a lot about this.
Well, I would love for you to get us started, Sandra, and maybe other people from your group. It is fine for you to unmute. If you could get us started, that'd be fabulous.
Absolutely. We talked about various domains that this particular activity addressed. We could, we talked about diapers, moving diapers from one place to the other by pushing the diaper box. And if mom were to say, could you push this over there close to the changing table, then you're talking about receptive language skills, and as well as the gross motor skill of being able to push the box. We talked about filling objects into a pretend shopping cart so that they could organically have some heavy work opportunities as they go about playing. Oops. Oh, it's still pushing heavy objects. We also talked about, okay, so that would be along the lines of cognition. And of course, we talked about the function, the test item, and not being a physical therapist, I didn't have a whole lot to say about that. But I think we did have a PT in the group, or at least someone who was more knowledgeable of the requirements there, when they would talk about how they attacked the action of moving the basket or the box, their posture, their lean. I guess if their
Does
feet were
somebody want to
pointed
jump
out.
in? Oh, I have a bad echo. Does somebody want to jump in and help Sandra with that discussion?
So for
Oh,
physical
come on.
therapy,
There you go.
Go ahead. Somebody was going to jump in.
yeah. So for physical therapy, I just mentioned that it's not only the sensory stuff that we're looking at, but also the act of the pushing. So when, when the child's center of gravity is shifted forward in that base of support, are they able to maintain their balance? Are they compensating? Are they widening their base of support with their legs as well to help compensate? Are they able to push it? How far are they able to push it? Are they using any other forms of compensation?
Thanks, Stacy. Yes. So I think that you guys have hit some, the domains, what the functional skills. Sometimes we talk about heavy work for children. For some children, that's a calming, that's a social emotional kind of thing, a calming activity. So
we went into detail on that too.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Sandra?
Well, we talked about how not only can it be calming, but it can be alerting and helps get those muscles firing, but that also helps getting the brain, the cogs going and getting into that just right space for learning.
Ready to learn. Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Group 4. Let's go ahead and Hyacinth adds proprioceptive input. Exactly.
Yes.
Needed in so many different things that we do, that we really do use on a daily basis. Even as adults, we can easily think about that. Yes, thank you. So let's look at Group 5, and Dana's going to talk about that one.
All right, so Cheerios in a bottle or pegs in a bottle, put something in a bottle. And this was always one of those ones that it's like a trick to get them to. Cheerios is the best way to go, because we would use other things and you had to help the child practice it while also being ready to snatch it away from them if the little object went towards their mouths. So let me hear from Group 5. Is somebody able to unmute there?
So I'll talk about 5 because I took notes. I don't know if anybody else did. We talked about the domains of fine motor, obviously with the hand-eye coordination and the pincer grasp. We talked about the cognitive area domain as far as imitation, attention, following directions, as well as communication and following directions, and I guess imitation as well. The functional skills related could be eating and dressing, putting food in your own mouth and using a fork. I mean, it's obviously going to help. And as well as those future writing, pincher grasp kinds of things. So really explaining to caregivers that it helps with all of those things, feeding and dressing and writing, and opportunities to practice would be during meal times, taking in and out toys, because that's what kids like to do anyway at those young ages, is dump and fill, and making containers small enough so that it is kind of a could be a challenge to put things in and take out, and any kinds of different foods in different containers.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. You covered it all. I appreciate you taking notes. That's really helpful because you had lots of stuff to cover. Yeah. One of the things I love about what you guys have did, and all of the groups have done, is looked at each developmental task on the test. All of them can cover and address multiple areas of development, multiple domains, and can be addressed in multiple activities. So I think that's a huge takeaway from this activity, right? Any single skill we can pull out multiple domains, even if it primarily falls on the fine motor, like this one usually does, fine motor or cognitive sections of the test. So thinking about these from multiple dimensions is so important, because that's how development works, right? It's always interrelated. So thank you for doing that with us for number 5. I'm going to pass it back to Corey to keep us going.
We do appreciate all the work you all did in your breakout groups. And I think that the takeaway from this activity is that our understanding of child development and then really understanding the functionality of those items are our tests and what the underlying skills. It's not bad that we have those discrete skills. I mean, that's how we use those anchor tools for our assessments, but understanding why we do it, and then how to explain that to families and how to apply it in everyday routines and activities. Sometimes we continue to have some cognitive dissonance, and sometimes you see IFSP goals or outcomes that are still really tied to the test. And as we've talked about, we don't want families to go shopping for our testing tool items. What happens if we go on a visit for our assessment and we forgot something? We left our blocks at home or back in the office. So not bad, but on the spot of what does this look like, and help families to really understand what we're looking for. Dana?
All right, guys, so as we start to wrap up, I'm looking at our time. I know we've only got about 4 minutes left. We wanted to check in and just touch base that what we were trying to accomplish today, as Corey said, is to help you recognize the importance of strong child development knowledge across developmental domains. We explored functionality of 6 discrete tasks just as to get you in practice for looking at tasks that way. And hopefully you got some ideas for how to take those skills, identify them, know what you're really looking for, and information you can share with others about how they can be observed in family routines and activities. We also wanted to make you aware of some resources. Feel free to type into the Zoom chat if there are resources you really like, your go-to resources for learning about assessment. We would love to hear from you about what's maybe happening in your state or what kind of national resources you like. You also have on your handout a list of resources that are hyperlinked, so you can check them out. We have some in Virginia. We have an assessment topic page on the VEIPD.org site. We have learning paths. We have links to checklists and a podcast about functional assessment. So lots of good stuff there. So we hope that you'll check it out. All righty, Lisa.
Thanks, Dana. So we'd like you, like every conference session, I'm sure that you attend, we really want to make sure that you're taking away something. So just identify 2 top key takeaways that you'd like to share with colleagues. Jot them down so that way it'll help you kind of remember the information and revisit it later as well. And if you don't mind sharing, just drop it in chat for us as well. And I'm going to go ahead while you guys are typing in the chat, and I'll go to the closing slide just in case you want to get our information as well. If I can find the move on button. All right. And so if you guys also have any questions, feel free to jot those down into chat and we'd be happy to answer that. I think we have about 3 minutes left for questions. And then Corey's email, Dana's email, myself, is all up on the screen, so feel free to email any of us. We are so open to answering any questions and be available to you to support you. But we do appreciate your participation today, and we hope that you guys all have a great day.